didn't see you there. Yeah, I mean, I've just been playing the Nintendo Switch here lately. I've been really enjoying its library, especially with the indie games. It's really addicting. There's just a lot of really good ones on here. What do you mean it's been 2 months since my last video? Oh, and the one about monsters? Don't worry about it. I'm working on it. It's in the works. I'm just a little slow, that's all. And really, I've just been enjoying a lot of these good games and streaming them. Man, it's been a lot of fun lately. What do you mean I'm lazy? I'm not lazy. I've just been a little busy, that's all. What? No. Okay, fine. You know what? I came up with this really cool device. You know, it's going to stream out a lot of videos at a lot of time, just all in one moment. So here, just in one moment, I got it set up on my Switch. All I got to do is press this one button, and... Huh. Well, crap. This isn't what I'm supposed to do. Alright, fine. We do it the old-fashioned way. Start the intro. I'll go figure it out. That dang devices. Never worked the first time. Never. Indie games. The market, in my opinion, that ultimately usurped the AA market. You know, the market that was mainly consisted of movie tie-in games, simple games with cool ideas, or maybe even a AAA game with a lower budget that could not find a publisher. See, back in the day, these were everywhere, and we actually got a bunch of decent games in this vein. Just look at all the Capcom Disney games in the 8 and 16-bit era. However, around the late PS2/early PS3 era, we began to see a decline in these titles, in both number of titles and overall sales numbers. As the gaming market pushed further and further down the technological landscape, it seemed that both the cost for games and gamers' expectations for games were skyrocketing. Meaning these middle-of-the-road games would either have to concede to a bigger budget and higher quality standards, a la AAA gaming, or see massive decline in sales and ultimately not make its money back. Thus, around the late 2000s, we see the death of this bracket of gaming, which ultimately would lead to certain companies like THQ to exit the market a few years later, as they could not adapt fast enough to the rapid change of the video game landscape. And with the exit of the AA market, it essentially meant that there was going to be a hole in the marketplace. A hole much kind of needed, really. I mean, to be fair, I love my AAA $60 games. They're a lot of fun, and I really enjoy them. But to be fair, I'm a gamer that loves all kind of games. And really, the AA market was something that I kind of grew up with. I loved my kind of movie tie-in games. You know, you went to the movies, you saw this new epic flick, and you wanted to come home and you wanted to play it. You wanted to be it, and it was really cool for the time. But really, if I really think back to those times, the AA market had really fallen, and it really wasn't doing very well. Some really mediocre games were kind of occurring, and it just wasn't good overall. But luckily, that hole was left, and it kind of just left it open for what would ultimately be the indie scene. Personally, I attribute the current indie market to the early days of the internet and what are known as flash games. See, for those who either weren't a teenager, were not bored easily, or weren't too poor to afford the latest games in the early 2000s, there was this budding subsector of the internet called flash games. Man, I spent so much time in these in my early teens. See, back then I both had too much time on my hands due to school and was too poor to buy games myself, so I spent my days browsing the early internet looking for free games. This ultimately led me to the websites like Newgrounds and Armor Games, where I played all these new, free, and honestly a bit janky games that generally lasted anywhere from 30 minutes to maybe a few hours. At the time, this was amazing, and as a kid, I can honestly say some of my best memories are at these websites. Heck, this is ultimately what led me to RuneScape and my miniature addiction to that game. It was a fantastic time. It was truly the Wild West of the internet. The beautiful thing that really came out of this, though, was the fact that these games were quite easy to make. See, back then, I did not know this, but Flash was a pretty good introductory programming language for many people. It was designed for a more casual audience, so it was easier to pick up and begin programming. This created a whole new generation of gaming programmers that cut their teeth using this language. See, to develop a game back then, you either had to be working for a big-name company or have a contracted gig with a known big name in order to get proper publishing on any of the main gaming platforms. Flash in the early days of the internet really helped the little guy get a start. Granted, with no way to monetize their games they made, usually, but it still allowed them to practice and get recognition for their work. So here we have it. Two kind of worlds colliding. One declining, the AA market, and one growing and trying to find its way kind of into the marketplace, which is these awesome Flash indie games that we had over here on the PC. The real problem, though, is we kind of didn't have a home to move these over, right? These guys were developing kind of like these little niche download titles, and we didn't really have the infrastructure yet. Nothing was kind of developed that way. We were just starting to dabble in that networking, and over here we had this market declining and this kind of hole in the market growing bigger and bigger for these cheaper, more accessible titles that people would love to just pick up and play and just kind of enjoy. Oddly enough, though, it would be Microsoft with their Xbox 360 that kind of came in. And I say oddly not in the sense that it was odd because they had the best infrastructure kind of to set it up, but really because they didn't do a whole lot for them on the PC space. It's interesting that they found this little slice inside of their PC world and said, hey, we could bring this over and leverage this and kind of use it to our advantage. And honestly, that's really cool, and really it's a good intro to them, and I love it. So yeah, let's go take a look at these lovely indies. The early console indie days. Man, were these an interesting time. For those who don't remember, these were the times when downloadable titles were very new. Smartphones and their app culture had just started, and consoles with indie games had also just started. Gamers in the PC space were in the early days of Steam, so it was quite new to have a storefront with these smaller, cheaper titles to download and play. Quite a few gems came out of this era. See, back then we would maybe get a new title once or twice a week, if lucky, so the games came out much slower and generally were much smaller. Again, coming from that Flash community, primarily where the experience was more about experimenting and building a compelling, fun game, almost like the early days of gaming back on the NES and SNES. We got awesome games like Braid, Cloning Clyde, and Geometry Wars. We also saw some original Flash games get converted into better versions, like Meat Boy turning into Super Meat Boy. It was a fantastic time. Well, one game in particular that I missed was a title called VVVVVV. This game was made by a pretty famous Flash game developer of the time, Terry Kavanagh. He spent much of his early career before VVVVVV making almost 20 different Flash games. At the time, he was just messing around with all sorts of gaming concepts and was doing it almost as a side hobby. During this testing period, he had come up with the idea of a platformer where you could only control the gravity the character would experience. He liked this flipping mechanic so much that he dedicated a month or two in late 2009 to developing an entire game based on it. He finished a demo in late December 2009, and the game was released 1 month later for Mac and PC. The game would go on to receive a lot of praise in the community, and ultimately would lead to Kavanagh getting another developer to translate the game into C++, allowing the game to eventually be ported to Linux, 3DS, and eventually modern consoles. So, here we have it. This is kind of where it's all been kind of building to. VVVVVV, here on the Nintendo Switch. So, this isn't my first time playing this game, but really it just recently got released, probably about a month or two ago on the Switch, and honestly I absolutely love the game. I loved it on Steam. I initially got it through a Humble Bundle. Didn't really play it for years after buying it. One day I was going through my backloggery, and boom, it chose VVVVV. And honestly, my initial impressions, I fell in love with this game. To be fair, Warren, stepping into this video, I really liked VVVVV. But I kind of saw this as an opportunity to try and, test one of the old guard and see how it kind of holds up on a handheld. I mean, initially it was released on PC and then got ported over to the 3DS and modern consoles. And so this is kind of a mix of both. It's a modern console that is a handheld, and I kind of wanted to try it out, while also, taking an opportunity to really, reflect on a game that I kind of came late to, and I really like. So, you know what? Let's jump into this review. Let's see how VVVVVV holds up today. VVVVVV starts where most of these early indie games start, and that is with some tiny exposition. We found out a crew of people? Aliens? Bit creatures? I don't know what these are supposed to be, but I guess for now I'm going to call them Bittonians, as they seem like nothing but generic bit people to me. Anyways, these people are flying through space in what I guess is supposed to be a ship, when all of a sudden the ship is hit by a force that seems to cause the ship to be pulled into another dimension. Upon this dimension change, we notice that all of the crew and our main character, Captain Viridian, have been ripped from the ship and scattered throughout the dimension, which leads us to the pretty basic plot of getting back to our ship, saving all our crew members, and getting back to our original dimension and heading home. Overall, the plot is very basic and is pretty typical for the time. Since most of the teams making these games were 1 or 2-man teams, they could generally only focus on a few aspects of the game at a time. Some focused heavily on interesting art and story, while others focused on gameplay and interesting mechanics. VVVVVV falls in the later camp. I generally criticize this type of plot, but due to the time and nature of the era, I'd say this is perfectly acceptable. Something interesting though is that scattered throughout the world we do have these monitors that you can collect that kind of explain what is happening with this dimension and why we have all these dimension problems. It is nothing mind-bending, but I really appreciate it, and it made it fun to determine what exactly was going on. Alright, story aside, how is the gameplay? Well, to be honest, it is actually super basic, and oddly enough, that actually benefits the game. See, Cav and I used this game as more of an exploratory ground for this one mechanic. You only have 3 actions really in the entire game. Move left, move right, and flip. That's it. And honestly, it works really, really well. With only one mechanic, Kavanaugh was able to explore level design and see what all he could do with just that one mechanic. Overall, he does a very good job with it too. The game has 6 main levels, all with unique gameplay themes, and all connected in a single open world. The open world aspect is very fascinating to me, as at the time of my first playthrough of the game, I had never played a non-Metroidvania platformer that used this structure. Overall, it actually serves the game design really well, and helped create a good world presence and helped immerse me in this world. Speaking of immersion, let's talk graphics and soundtrack real quick. As you probably noticed already, the graphics in this game are a bit basic. By design, however, again, Kavanaugh made this entirely by himself and knew he could not have the resources to make amazing graphics. So instead, he did the opposite. Kavanaugh grew up with the Commodore 64 and loved the platform as a whole. So he dedicated his limited resources to mimicking the graphical style of the Commodore 64, with its one-color screens, super simple sprites, and black backgrounds. It works really well, with its striking appearance that I have yet to see duplicated in another indie title. It really made it stand out for me. And this is despite the fact that I don't even have any real fondness for the pre-NES era either. The art is a bit basic, yes, but to be fair, then and even now, this art style is very unique, and I think adds to the charm overall. As for the music, it again seems to pay homage to the Commodore 64 era, but almost with an NES/SNES music philosophy. It has the sounds of the Commodore 64, but uses much more melodic and catchy tunes to keep repeated listens from getting ear-grating or annoying. The tone of the tracks is mainly upbeat, fast-paced, chiptune-like pieces. At the start, this only appears as just a stylistic choice, but as you progress further and further, you discover that the music actually lends really well to the many fast-paced platforming segments, and I found myself beeping and bopping in the music as I cruised through the game. However, I hope you enjoy the overworld theme, because man, you hear it a lot in this game. There are 8 tracks in total, with the overworld theme playing essentially throughout the game. The only time the music really changes is in specific levels and the end sequence. Otherwise, it defaults to the overworld theme. This didn't bother me too much, but if you're not into repetitive soundtracks, I would definitely note this as a weaker point. On the whole, I really enjoyed the presentation of this game, and for a short game, it really left a huge impact on me. The art style I immediately recognize, and the music is still something I come back to from time to time. For a one-man team, it is really impressive that the presentation leaves such an impression, especially with it being so low on Kavanaugh's priority list. If presentation was at the bottom of the priority list, it really shows just how much work went into the mechanics and level design, and man, does it show. I would say VVVVVV has some of the best pure game mechanics I have ever encountered in an indie platformer. From a level design aspect, every world is centered around a different use of this flip mechanic. One world you're having to deal with conveyor belts that move you left or right. In another you have to bounce on these lines that force you to flip directions. and another has you go through a vertical auto-scrolling section, testing your ability to flip back and forth. It's just so good, and really puts this flipping mechanic to the test. It really makes you master it. My favorite level, overall, is the one where you have to flip in between flying hazards while traversing screen to screen. What's interesting is that, for the most part, it is about a broadcast channel sending out lies. Lies being the hazard, and feeding them into the other end of a network system. It is a subtle, yet very early, think 2010, joke on the climate of typical broadcast news. I love it, and you really can see the personality of Kavanaugh come through in this one scene. It is really structured well, and I would say that all the challenge in the game is very fair as a whole. Well, almost all the challenges in the game are fair. See, one piece of the gameplay I have left out so far are the trinkets. There are 20 trinkets in total scattered throughout the world, and they act as a collectible for completionists. Collect all 20 and you get an extra scene at the end of the game and a sort of mini hub with a few mini games, additional in-game achievements, and sound room. It's a nice treat and more than I can say for most games in terms of a completionist reward, and they're actually really fun to collect, for the most part. See, I would say 95% of them are very challenging rewards that offer interesting and neat challenges. I feel most players will have a tough but fun time trying to get these. However, when I say 95%, I mean 95%, as there is one trinket in particular that I feel goes just a bit too far. Those who have played this gem of a game before know what I'm talking about, and that challenge is Veni, Vidi, Vici, or in English, doing things the hard way. Don't get me wrong, I actually love this trinket challenge. It is a 5-screen gauntlet that requires you to navigate with only one flip, these 5 screens, hit a platform at the very top of the 5 screens, and then go back through the same 5 screens, but backwards. All without a single safe spot. Screw up with any movement and bam, you're done. Back to the beginning. This screen took me over 500 tries the first time I did it. Second time, around 200. I love challenges like these. It is a pure skill in memorization. It embodies the very idea of get good. This challenge is probably my favorite in the game and is the thing I remember the most about the game. It requires pure mastery of the controls and was a ton of fun to grind out. So why do I have a problem with it? Well, to be frank, it mainly is that I think for 99% of the players that play this game, this challenge is just too hard and way too out of left field. In terms of difficulty spike, it sits on a whole other level compared to the other 19 trinkets. The fact that this gates people off from some cool endgame bonuses, as well as some additional endgame modes, I'll cover that shortly, to me just seems a bit too far. I'm all for challenges in games and offering up a completionist bonus, but making this lockout content is just a bit too much for me. I would say this challenge is comparable to the 200 Lightning Flash challenge in Final Fantasy X for some people. Imagine if that game gated most of the endgame content, just because you could not do that one super hard side challenge. I feel it would be absurd, and many would agree. It should not be gated that way. Again, I love this challenge as a platformer fan, but I don't know if I agree with using it as a gating factor. But I digress. Looking at overall game length, I could definitely say that VVVVVV is on the shorter side. I feel you could beat the game in about an hour if you're just trying to beat it, and about 3 hours to get all the trinkets. As stated before, you unlock some cool stuff upon completing the game. Outside of the extra hub world, you will also unlock time trial mode and one death run mode. Fuck the one death run mode. In my first playthrough, I died around 1,000 times, and in my run for this review, I died about 520 times. Getting that down to one life seems miserable and not fun at all. To those who have done it, I salute you, but that is where I draw the line. I would say overall the game is quite light on content as a base package. For the current price you would get it for, it definitely does not seem worth it. But remembering this came out in the early indie craze, this length matches for what we were seeing around then. I really can't knock it for being a product of its time. Luckily, the game on Steam and most modern consoles is version 2.0. See, back when the game got ported to C++ on the PC, it got a level editor. The community went bonkers with this thing, and a ton of level packs came out for the game. Heck, some made all new games using the level editor, really adding to the value of the overall package. Thankfully for console owners, when the game came out on 3DS and modern consoles, it got a best of series of all the fan-made level/games. There are over 20 plus fan games on here, so there's a ton more to play if you're itching for more after the base game. For the time in which VVVVVV was released, it really embodied the indie era. Small game made by one man with tight, awesome level design, with cool art style, and an awesome chiptune music soundtrack. To me, this game is everything I love about gaming. Fun, tough challenge with, for the most part, the ability to be as hard as you like depending on what challenges you try, while having unique art styles and amazing music. This game and a few others truly made me fall in love with the prospects of the indie scene back in the day. Though as a base package, it is fairly short. Again, you could probably finish it in an hour. I would say it is definitely worth playing if you like platformers or just want a challenge. The game is out on all modern consoles except the Xbox One and can be found for relatively cheap. VVVVVV is one of my favorite indie games of all time, and I urge more people to play it if they find the genre interesting or are looking for their next indie game fix. So there you have it, VVVVVV, a gem of an indie game, and to be honest, I absolutely love it. It's one of those games that really I missed at the beginning of the indie turn. I was really early on. I loved Braid and I loved Super Meat Boy, Cloning Collide, as I said. I really love those games, and it's really a shocker that I missed VVVVVV. But I'm so glad I was able to play it, not only now, but also back in 2013. And really, as a platformer fan, really hit home to me. I really liked that it focused on one idea, and it really drove it home and really mastered it. I found it to be an excellent idea. And so I really hope you guys get a chance to check it out. It's on Steam, it's on the Switch, it's on the PS4, it's pretty much everywhere. If you can just look it up, it's pretty easy to find. So anyways, guys, if you like this video, please hit that like button. Otherwise, please go down to the comment box below and let me know what you think about either VVV or the video. I'd love to hear improvements or anything that you would like to see for the show, or maybe some games you'd like to see a review. Otherwise, please hit that subscribe button. I do reviews, and I'll be doing some topical stuff in the future, so please stick around to kind of see all that. This game was voted on Twitter by my Twitter followers, so if you want to kind of keep up with my updates or you want to, participate in some polls, I do it there. I'll be trying to do some stuff here in the community tab as well. The only other really working piece is that I do stream all these games over at twitch.tv/BlueBlazingDemon. I basically stream all the games I'm going to be reviewing. You can kind of get some early thoughts there, and you can come interact with me in real time. So, hey, come check me out over there as well. Yeah. All that kind of leaves left is, again, what is next? We're gonna go find some beasties. That, I promise you, that is the next video. I do have it ready. I think I have the system figured out from before. I don't know. Let me see. I'm gonna try it one more time. I'm gonna give it a shot. If not, I'll just go back to the drawing board. I'll keep working on the script for Monster Hunter. We'll just kind of go from there. All right. See you ready and. All right. Screw it. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.